My name is Calvin Gladney. My company is Mosaic Urban Partners, and what we're going to talk to you today is about social equity, real estate development, and the role of the private sector. And Michael mentioned that I'm the senior visiting fellow for equity at ULI, and I'm also have the honor and privilege of being a ULI trustee. But my comments today are just one man's thoughts. And so that's the context of my remarks today. And speaking of my thoughts, the private sector is getting a bad rap these days. This is a project that's right down the block from a real estate development project we did in DC. And it was a commercial redevelopment of a commercial site. And someone, as you can see, wrote, "Gentrification is racism and Black Lives Matter" on the side of the building. And you know what, actually, I'll tell you a little story about this site later, but I want to tell you another story first, just to talk about how, as developers and private sector real estate professionals, we sometimes get attacked for some moments of inequality and inequity in neighborhoods that maybe we didn't necessarily cause. Has anybody here heard the story of the scorpion and the frog? Scorpion and frog? It's a couple. So just for you that don't know the story, so the scorpion and the frog. So there's a scorpion and a frog, and they're at the banks of a river. And the frog's about to jump in the river, and the scorpion says, "Hey, Mr. Frog, I don't know how to swim. Can I just get on your back as you kind of swim across? And that would help me a lot so I can get on the other side." And the frog says, but Mr. Scorpion, won't you sting me? I mean, that. And the scorpion's like, "Well, that doesn't make any sense, because if I sting you, then we would both drown." And the frog's like, "Oh, okay." So scorpion gets on the back of the frog's swimming across the river, and the scorpion turns and stings the frog. And as the frog is floating to its death, it looks at the scorpion and says, "Mr. Scorpion, why did you sting me?" And the scorpion says, "It's my nature. It's what I do." And as developers, sometimes we get beat up on issues of social equity, social inequality, for frankly, in a way, doing what we do, right? We build buildings, we make places, we make things happen for our shareholders, our business partners, our employees, for our companies. And oftentimes, like you saw in that building, we get attacked for issues of gentrification and the like, even though in a way, we're just scorpions. We're just kind of doing what we do. So that's the scorpion and the frog, and I always like to tell that story. And when you think about it, and we're all out there trying to get our ducks in a row. So I want to talk to you, though, even as we think of ourselves as kind of scorpions getting attacked. Sometimes we tend to just throw up our hands and say, "Well, you know what? I'm tired of getting attacked for this kind of stuff. I didn't have anything to do with these problems. I didn't create these citywide societal issues. I'm not going to deal with it. I'm just going to focus on what I need to do, which is the economic performance of my projects. That's what I'm going to focus on. That's what I need to do." And what I'm going to argue with you today about, and I'm going to talk to you about, is the idea that we actually need to, just as Angela talked about earlier, we need to focus on issues of social inequality, not for necessarily issues of morality, not because necessarily we are mission-based businesses. But actually, I'm going to give you 3 reasons today we should focus on them, and they're also M's. And so let's talk about what I'll call the 3 M's, and hopefully that'll make it easy for you to remember. So the first M, and this is why we need to sort of step out of line for what we usually do, the first M is mandates. With the idea being that there are more trends these days around the country to create mandates on our real estate projects. Now, inclusionary zoning, lots of folks know about that, so that's kind of the easy part, right? There are laws that are being passed. But the mandates now, the trend is going farther than that. Anybody here from Brooklyn? I grew up in Brooklyn, and I was reading the New York Times just a couple of weeks ago, and it talked about a community-based and community-created neighborhood planning process. And through that process, the city started to work with them, and they said, "Well, hey, we now have a plan for this neighborhood called Gowanus in Brooklyn." And what you see on the picture is a visual of the Gowanus Canal it's a Superfund site. It's now being cleaned up, and now these gleaming new buildings are being built on the site. These 12-story apartment buildings with $4,000 a month rents and the like. And so this planning process, started by community and stakeholders, basically said, "You know what? We have a plan for this neighborhood, and we want to deal with gentrification and displacement, and so we are going to mandate 25% affordable housing. Not inclusionary zoning, not the force of a law, a community-based effort. So one of the things we need to think about as private sector real estate professionals is there's a trend towards more mandatory rules that make our projects have to deal with and implement some of the strategies for social equity. And so we have to think about these mandates. So that's the first M. But some of you are saying, you know what? In my jurisdiction, there ain't no mandates coming, so I'm good. So I don't need to worry about that. Well, let me give you a second M. Margins. Now, I see Bill in the front, one of my private sector folks. He says, margins? I'm at a bank. Now you're talking about money. Margins. We need to focus on issues of social inequality and take the lead, as I like to say, play offense on figuring out how to make these strategies work. Because these issues of social inequality and social inequity, just like Angela said earlier, will affect the economic performance of our projects. They will affect our margins. So again, not about mission, not about morality, about margins. And you think about it, and this is actually quoting the same study that you quoted earlier that PolicyLink created. The economic performance of our projects are inextricably intertwined with the economic performance of the state and the city in which our projects are located in. And as a matter of fact, the PolicyLink report that Angela spoke to earlier talked about how if a city or a jurisdiction has more inequality or inequity, the economic performance of the city goes down. And so that might be the gross domestic product of the state. That would be the income levels of those same demographics that have the sort of bad or inequitable outcomes in terms of their incomes. And frankly, another point is that the tax revenues to the cities are less. And if you think about it, okay, we're real estate professionals. What does this macroeconomics got to do with me? Well, if I'm a real estate professional, don't I want more people with more income to live, work, and play in the buildings that I build? If I'm a commercial developer, those are the potential employees of the employers who are new tenants in my building. So when we think about economic performance of our projects, we have to think about stepping into the lead about issues of social inequality and social inequity and think about those strategies because that inequity does affect directly our projects. It's not an issue of morality, it's an issue of margins. Now, some of you might be saying, well, you know what, and you're probably not saying this out loud, but you're saying to yourself, you know, those demographics that would have better incomes, those are not my people, right? They're not going to be buying my condos, they're not going to be renting in my buildings, those are not my people. But actually, the Pew Research Center says, one, the millennial generation, almost 40% of them identify themselves, and this goes with some of the demographics you talked about, as non-white, ethnic, or minority group members. And so if you're thinking about selling to millennials, if you're thinking about renting to millennials, if you're thinking about building office buildings where the main tenants will be employers that are going to hire millennials, then maybe you need to think about these issues of inequity. Because millennials not only are more diverse, they also want to live in and work in and play in neighborhoods and in projects, meaning your developments, that are also diverse. They want to see diversity. And so they want to see more people that look like them live, work, and play in the places in which they live, work, and play. So let's think about it that way. And then finally, my third M. Some of you may be saying, hey, mandates not coming my way. Look, my margins, I'm good. I'm not worried about it. But the third thing is, it might just come up. It might just come up. So I told you about this, I showed you this picture earlier. This is a commercial building that's being redeveloped, and there were no residents there. So issues of gentrification. Now, this is Washington, D.C., by the way, a city that's still close to 50% African American. So a good portion of the people actually moving into this building, I actually live down the block from this building, are probably going to be African American. And so even though you may not have the force of mandates come your way, and you may think the margins on your project won't be affected because it won't affect your numbers, these issues are going to come up. Community engagement meetings, public approvals, city council members, political officials. sometimes these things just might come up. And it's the kind of thing where you say, these are problems. Any Game of Thrones fans here? You think about it and you're like, oh, these are like the kind of inequities, these problems, it's just a couple of them. They're kind of to the side. I can handle it. I don't need to worry about it. But the problem is, and I think Angela spoke to this earlier, if we keep avoiding it, if we keep not focusing on them, if we just try to defend the way that we do things, they metastasize and they become an army of the dead like in Game of Thrones. So we have to deal with them. We can't say inequity is something that just is for people who want to deal with policy or social programs. They will affect us as private sector real estate professionals doing what we do. And so I've been arguing with you, but again, don't take my word for it. The ULI Trends report from 2017 interviewed 500 industry leaders in the real estate profession around the country, almost all private sector professionals. As a matter of fact, they also received 1,500 survey responses from the same private sector industry professionals from all sectors around the country. And when they asked them, what were the most important things that would affect the performance of your real estate projects, what would affect your real estate, you know what they said when you look at the top 15? Here are 4 of them. The number 1 was jobs and income growth. Number 6 was housing costs and availability. And as a matter of fact, numbers 10 and 12, they specifically call out social inequality and income inequality as the things that they were concerned about that would affect their ability to deal and develop and to finance and invest in real estate going forward in 2017. Now on Thursday, ULI is going to reveal the 2018 Trends report. Now, how many people here actually think that these numbers are going to change and people are going to be less concerned about these issues? No, right? So we have to step up. We can't just keep playing defense. We need to play offense. Now, Magic is speaking, so I figured I'd throw this in terms of playing offense. But, I say this metaphorically, but let's just talk about it tactically for a second. What do I mean by playing offense? How do we play offense? We need to create some toolkits. We need to be able to give kind of plug-and-play methods to get these things done. We need to show best practices, create referrals to the experts, the ones who are getting these things done, the ones who have figured out how to build the margins, how to build the business case, how to create and take those best practices and actually implement them in projects. And frankly, kind of what we're doing now, we need to convene what I call the non-choir, the folks that don't think they need to do this at all. And we need to have these type of discussions, both public and private, and say, look, these things are relevant to the performance of your projects, and these are relevant to what you're going to need to talk to your shareholders, your stakeholders, and your fellow business people. We can't just kind of keep doing what we're doing. As a matter of fact, we have to think about this not as an academic exercise, not as something that we're going to create kind of a policy paper that's going to be groundbreaking. No, we need to create the pro formas that show the business case that we can get to the groundbreaking. And yes, that's me with the shovel on that groundbreaking right there. We really need to get to the point where we don't just throw up our hands and say these inequalities have nothing to do with us, they're not our issues. We really need to get to the place where we're stepping up and we're not putting a blind eye to inequities because we're private sector professionals. We're not saying to ourselves, well, I'm just not going to listen to those stakeholders. They don't really understand where we sit as private sector professionals. We can't stay in the place where we don't speak up and we don't have the tough and candid conversations with the public sector about the costs and the ramifications of some of these rules and mandates. We have to step up. We have to do the things that will step into the place of the business case, explain it, and get those practices out around the country. So yes, what I'm saying is we can no longer continue to just defend what we do and just say, I'm just going to step away from it. We have to play offense, not defense. What I'm saying is we need to lead. Thank you.